By the late 1930s, Nazi Germany was no longer satisfied with dominating Europe. Hitler's ambitions extended to territories few Europeans had even glimpsed. Among these, one of the most remote and mysterious regions was Antarctica, a continent of ice, isolation, and strategic possibilities. For the Third Reich, it offered more than scientific curiosity. It promised hidden resources, secret military bases, and a testing ground for technologies beyond the reach of conventional aircraft, ships, or artillery. Germany's fascination with Antarctica did not emerge spontaneously. Expeditions by other nations had mapped portions of the continent, revealing untapped mineral wealth and vast tracts of unexplored land. The Norwegians, the British, and even Argentina had undertaken missions there in the 1920s and 1930s. The Third Reich, eager to assert its global influence and secure raw materials, began eyeing the southern continent as both a symbolic and strategic prize. In 1938, Hitler authorized the German Antarctic expedition, also known as the Neuschwabenland expedition. Led by Captain Alfred Richer, the expedition departed aboard the vessel MS Schwabenland in December of that year, carrying a team of scientists, cartographers, and naval officers. Their mission was twofold: to map and survey unexplored regions of Antarctica, and to claim territory for Germany in the name of the Reich. This expedition was cloaked in secrecy from the outset, with public explanations emphasizing scientific research and whaling operations. Archive.org. The expedition included state-of-the-art aerial reconnaissance. 2 Dornier-Wal seaplanes were equipped with high-resolution cameras capable of capturing images across vast stretches of ice and mountains. From above, the team began mapping Queen Maud Land, an area later referred to as Neuschwabenland, meaning New Swabia, in honor of Hitler's homeland region. Thousands of photographs were taken, and the Germans meticulously catalogued glaciers, mountains, and possible landing sites. These images would later form the basis of maps used in secret planning. The Germans were not merely interested in geography. Scientific investigations included geology, meteorology, and glaciology, providing insights into the Antarctic ice sheet and subglacial features. Reports indicate that the team examined mineral deposits, noting the presence of coal, iron, and other potential resources that could benefit the Reich in a prolonged war. Whaling stations were officially cited as part of the mission, but evidence suggests these operations were secondary to military planning. www.incolor.com. Hitler himself was intrigued by the potential of a secret base in Antarctica. It aligned with his vision of global reach, a hidden foothold from which Germany could launch exploratory, experimental, or even offensive operations far from Allied surveillance. The Antarctic base was imagined as a launching site for advanced aircraft, possibly even jet or rocket-powered planes that could circumvent conventional limitations. Documents and testimonies from former expedition members suggest that the Reich considered testing prototype technologies in isolation, free from prying eyes or espionage. By early 1939, plans for the Antarctic base began to take shape on paper. Maps from the Neuschwabenland expedition were analyzed in Berlin, alongside sketches of possible construction sites and logistical routes. The Germans considered coastal landing zones, ice shelf runways, and protected bays where aircraft or ships could dock and resupply. Engineers theorized temporary hangars constructed from insulated modular materials, camouflaged against aerial observation. These designs, though never fully realized, show a remarkable understanding of Antarctic conditions. Extreme cold, katabatic winds, and shifting ice shelves. Hitler's vision extended beyond mere survival. The Antarctic base was to serve as a research hub for experimental aviation and weaponry. Some plans hint at the development of long-range aircraft capable of intercontinental flight, which in theory could one day strike Allied territories thousands of kilometers away. While conventional bombers of the era could not cross oceans without refueling, a base in Antarctica offered a launch point for missions over the southern Atlantic, or even towards South America, strategically significant for the Reich's long-term ambitions. The Nazi ideology of secrecy and technological supremacy played a major role in shaping the project. The expedition returned to Germany with thousands of photographs and hundreds of pages of detailed observations. These materials were immediately classified, with access restricted to high-ranking officials within the Reichsluftfahrtministerium, RLM, and select scientists. The base, if ever constructed, was to remain invisible, a phantom outpost far beyond Allied reach. Preparations for construction were never fully realized before the outbreak of World War II, yet the foundations of Hitler's Antarctic project remained active in planning documents and classified memoranda. Engineers continued to debate structural designs, aircraft testing protocols, and energy generation methods suitable for polar extremes. Some sketches included subsurface bunkers, reinforced runways, and wind-powered generators, anticipating the need for self-sufficiency in one of the harshest climates on Earth. Alongside these technical considerations, propaganda and myth began to entwine with reality. The secrecy surrounding Antarctica allowed rumors to flourish, both within Germany and abroad. Some claimed that the Reich intended to build an operational city under the ice, complete with laboratories, armories, and launch facilities. While many of these reports were exaggerated, they reflect the combination of genuine strategic planning and the fascination that isolation breeds. The Neuschwabenland expedition also included reconnaissance of ice-free areas along the Princess Martha coast and Mount Dronning Maud, which were deemed suitable for temporary landing strips. These regions, shielded from prevailing winds and surrounded by ice ridges, would allow aircraft to taxi, refuel, or even assemble modular components for experimental flights. The Germans recognized the logistical challenges, transporting construction materials, maintaining energy supplies, and ensuring personnel survival in sub-zero temperatures. www2history.info. In addition to technical and strategic considerations, Hitler's Antarctic ambitions were also symbolic. A foothold on the southernmost continent would reinforce Nazi claims to global supremacy, sending a message to both allies and neutral nations. It reflected the Reich's obsession with exploration, dominance, and technological edge, echoing earlier Nazi expeditions to the Arctic and Africa, but elevated to an almost mythical level of secrecy. By late 1939, with Europe plunged into war, the Antarctic base project moved from theoretical planning to early-stage logistics, though never beyond preliminary surveys. Ships and personnel remained largely focused on the European theatre, and the global conflict demanded immediate allocation of resources. Nevertheless, the groundwork had been laid. Maps, photographs, and preliminary construction plans remained in Germany, carefully catalogued and hidden. Even as the war escalated, whispers of the Antarctic base persisted. Intelligence reports from Allied spies occasionally mentioned German activity in the southern hemisphere, though they were largely dismissed as improbable or exaggerations. Today, historians recognize that while the base never reached operational status, the planning and surveys represent one of the most ambitious secret projects of the Third Reich, a plan combining engineering ingenuity, extreme logistics, and the ideological drive for global dominance. When World War II began, Germany's Antarctic ambitions did not simply vanish, they changed shape. What had started as exploration and territorial surveying quietly shifted towards secrecy, logistics, and contingency planning. Antarctica was no longer just a scientific curiosity. It became, at least on paper, a potential refuge, testing ground, and long-term strategic asset. After the Neuschwabenland expedition returned in 1939, its findings were absorbed into classified military archives. The photographs, maps, and geological reports did not circulate publicly. Instead, they were reviewed by naval planners, aviation engineers, and logistics officers. What mattered most was not conquest, but isolation. Antarctica offered something rare in wartime: distance from enemy bombers, spies, and surveillance. Germany's navy, the Kriegsmarine, had already developed experience with long-range operations far from Europe. German U-boats operated across the Atlantic, into the Indian Ocean, and as far south as the Antarctic convergence. Supply ships known as Milch-Coup submarines demonstrated that sustained operations in remote waters were possible. This naval reach made the idea of supporting a distant Antarctic outpost theoretically feasible. During the early years of the war, Germany focused its resources on immediate military needs. Tanks, aircraft, and conventional bases took priority. However, classified correspondence suggests that fallback locations were quietly considered if Europe became untenable. Antarctica appeared in these discussions not as a frontline base, but as a long-term contingency. The question was never whether Germany could dominate Antarctica militarily. It couldn't. The question was whether a small, hidden installation could exist undetected, serving limited but specific purposes: storage, research, or evacuation. Logistics were the primary obstacle. Antarctica was not just cold, it was hostile to machinery, fuel, and human survival. Engines froze, metals became brittle, lubricants failed. Any base would require constant resupply, reliable power, and protection from storms that could bury structures in ice within weeks. German engineers explored several concepts to address this. One involved semi-subterranean construction, embedding structures into ice or rock for insulation. Another proposed the use of natural ice-free zones, known as Antarctic oases, where exposed rock reduced accumulation and allowed more stable foundations. These areas were rare but known, including regions near Queen Maud Land, surveyed in 1938. There is no verified evidence that permanent construction began. However, there is strong evidence that temporary installations were considered realistic. Prefabricated shelters, similar to those used by polar expeditions, could be deployed quickly, used seasonally, and abandoned without leaving obvious traces. Aircraft played a central role in these plans. Germany's interest in long-range and experimental aircraft is well documented. Jet aircraft like the Me-262 and rocket-powered designs were already pushing the limits of aviation. Antarctica, isolated and sparsely observed, offered an ideal environment for testing flights, navigation systems, and cold weather performance. Some internal documents refer to southern test environments, a vague phrase that historians believe may reference polar conditions. However, these documents stop short of naming Antarctica explicitly. This ambiguity has fueled speculation for decades, but historians remain cautious. German submarines provide the most concrete operational link to Antarctica. Several U-boats are confirmed to have operated in southern waters during the later stages of the war. Their missions officially involved reconnaissance, weather monitoring, and disruption of Allied shipping routes. Weather data in particular was critical for planning operations in Europe. Weather stations were among the most valuable hidden assets of the war. Germany secretly installed automated weather stations across the Arctic. These stations transmitted data vital for forecasting. Some historians argue that Antarctica could have served a similar purpose, not as a base for weapons, but as a meteorological asset. A weather station required minimal personnel, limited infrastructure, and could be serviced intermittently. This aligns far more closely with Germany's actual capabilities than the idea of a full underground city or weapons complex. As the war turned against Germany after 1943, the idea of remote sanctuaries gained psychological weight. Nazi leadership became increasingly paranoid about defeat, capture, and the loss of sensitive research. Plans were drawn up to evacuate scientists, documents, and prototypes to locations far from advancing Allied forces. Southern South America, neutral territories, and isolated islands were discussed. Antarctica, while extreme, had one undeniable advantage: no permanent population and no military presence. There is evidence that some German scientists explored survival scenarios in polar environments. Training manuals and reports discuss cold endurance, shelter construction, and long-duration isolation. While these were not unique to Antarctica, they suggest that German planners were thinking beyond conventional theaters of war. One of the most persistent claims involves alleged post-war sightings of German submarines near Antarctica. These reports, often exaggerated or poorly sourced, have been used to support theories of hidden bases. However, verified naval records show that most U-boats were either destroyed, surrendered, or scuttled. A small number remained unaccounted for briefly, but no credible evidence places them at an operational Antarctic base. What is documented is that Germany possessed the knowledge and intent to operate in extreme environments, even if it lacked the resources to sustain them long-term. The Antarctic project sits at the boundary between ambition and reality. Another often misunderstood aspect is technology testing. Antarctica is sometimes portrayed as a launch site for advanced weapons. In reality, Germany's experimental programs were already struggling within Europe. Fuel shortages, bombing raids, and material scarcity crippled development. Transporting experimental technology to Antarctica would have been inefficient and risky. Instead, Antarctica's true appeal lay in concealment, not deployment. A hidden cache of documents, a temporary shelter, or a research outpost was far more realistic than an operational weapons base. As Germany collapsed in 1945, any remaining Antarctic plans became irrelevant. There is no evidence that personnel were evacuated there, nor that an active installation survived the war. Allied forces never found proof of a functioning base, despite extensive post-war investigations and intelligence gathering. However, the absence of evidence does not mean the absence of planning. What survived were fragments, maps, reports, logistical studies, and unanswered questions. These fragments formed the foundation of post-war myths and speculation. In the immediate aftermath of the war, Allied intelligence focused heavily on recovering German technology and scientists. Antarctica was briefly mentioned in some intelligence summaries, but no expedition was launched to investigate a base. The priority was Europe, not the ice. Over time, rumors filled the gaps left by secrecy and destruction of records. Some stories grew into legends, often disconnected from historical reality. The real story is less dramatic, but more revealing. A regime willing to imagine global reach, even when it lacked the means to achieve it. Part 2 ends with a clear picture. Germany explored Antarctica seriously, planned cautiously, and dreamed excessively, but never crossed the line into sustained occupation or construction. The project remained suspended between feasibility and fantasy, shaped as much by ideology as by engineering. When the Third Reich entered its final phase in late 1944, there was no longer any meaningful distinction between abandoned projects and destroyed ones. Germany's collapse did not arrive as a single moment, but as a cascading failure across military, industrial, administrative, and ideological systems. In that environment, long-term or speculative initiatives were not formally cancelled. They were simply starved of oxygen. Hitler's Antarctic ambitions died in exactly this way. By that stage of the war, Germany was no longer planning for years ahead. It was struggling to survive weeks. Fuel shortages crippled the Luftwaffe. Rail networks were shattered by Allied bombing. Submarine losses in the Atlantic had reached catastrophic levels. Ports were blockaded or destroyed. Any idea of sustaining operations beyond Europe, let alone at the southernmost edge of the planet, had become impossible. Yet the absence of a dramatic end would later allow the story to mutate. Unlike visible weapons programs, the Antarctic project left behind no ruins, no captured facilities, and no liberated prisoners. It existed primarily as documentation, intent, and early-stage planning. When the war ended and Germany's archives were scattered, destroyed, or seized, this lack of physical evidence created a vacuum. Into that vacuum stepped speculation. In the immediate aftermath of Germany's surrender, Allied intelligence agencies initiated massive investigative programs. Their goal was to identify, catalogue, and exploit German scientific and military knowledge. Projects like Operation Paperclip focused on extracting personnel and information, while naval intelligence units interrogated Kriegsmarine officers in depth. Antarctic exploration was not ignored. German polar researchers, meteorologists, naval officers involved in long-range planning, and participants of the 1938 to 1939 Neuschwabenland expedition were questioned directly. These interrogations were thorough, often repetitive and cross-checked. The answers revealed a consistent picture. Germany had explored Antarctica before the war. It had mapped territory. It had dropped markers. It had discussed future possibilities. But there was no evidence of construction, habitation, or sustained wartime presence. For intelligence analysts, this consistency mattered. Disinformation campaigns usually fracture under interrogation. Stories diverge. Timelines conflict. In this case, they did not. As far as post-war intelligence was concerned, the Antarctic question was settled early. But intelligence conclusions rarely shape popular memory. The late 1940s and 1950s were marked by a profound shift in public understanding of technology and secrecy. The revelation of German jet fighters, ballistic missiles, and advanced submarines stunned the world. These technologies had existed in secret while conventional warfare raged across Europe. The lesson absorbed by the public was simple and powerful. If something could be hidden, then something probably was hidden. Antarctica became the ultimate hidden place. At the same time, the Cold War transformed secrecy from a wartime necessity into a permanent condition. Governments withheld information as a matter of routine. Classified programs became normal. This environment blurred the line between plausible secrecy and implausible fantasy. When the United States Navy launched Operation High Jump in 1946, the conditions for myth were already in place. The expedition was massive by any standard. Thousands of personnel, aircraft carriers, submarines, and advanced aircraft were deployed to Antarctica. Official explanations emphasized training, testing equipment in extreme conditions, and mapping. To a public primed by wartime secrecy, this explanation felt insufficient. Rumors spread quickly. Some claimed the expedition encountered hostile resistance. Others suggested it was cut short due to combat losses. A few asserted it had destroyed a hidden Nazi base. These stories gained traction not because they were supported by evidence, but because they fit the emotional narrative of unfinished war. In reality, Operation High Jump faced what nearly all early Antarctic expeditions faced: brutal weather, mechanical failure, and human error. Aircraft crashed, men were lost to accidents, ice destroyed equipment. These outcomes were well documented. But documentation rarely competes successfully with mystery. Over time, the Antarctic myth detached entirely from its historical origins. The original German expedition, which had been well documented and openly acknowledged, faded into the background. In its place emerged a narrative of secret survival, underground bases, and advanced technology hidden beneath the ice. This narrative fed on itself. Each retelling added new elements. Submarines became capable of intercontinental journeys without refueling. Caverns beneath the ice expanded into self-sustaining cities. Experimental aircraft evolved into disc-shaped vehicles. What began as speculation hardened into belief for some audiences. What almost never entered these discussions was logistics. Antarctica is not merely remote, it is actively hostile to sustained human presence. Temperatures destroy machinery. Ice crushes structures, wind erodes exposed surfaces. Darkness lasts for months. Even modern research stations rely on constant resupply, international cooperation, and advanced materials. During World War II, Germany lacked every one of these prerequisites. Submarine technology, while impressive, was not capable of transporting the volume of fuel, food, and construction material required for a base. More importantly, submarines could not deliver bulk cargo efficiently, nor could they unload it onto icebound coastlines without extensive support infrastructure. Surface ships faced even greater challenges. Allied naval dominance made long-range voyages increasingly dangerous. Ice navigation required specialized hulls Germany did not possess in sufficient numbers. Any Antarctic convoy would have been extraordinarily visible to intelligence monitoring. Even if a base had somehow been established, sustaining it would have been impossible. Fuel consumption alone would have exceeded what Germany could spare. Medical emergencies would have been fatal. Equipment failure would have been unrecoverable. Personnel rotation would have been impractical. These constraints are not theoretical. They are borne out by decades of polar exploration data. Modern archaeological and scientific surveys further undermine the myth. Antarctica preserves traces of human activity exceptionally well. Fuel spills, metal debris, waste dumps, and structural remnants remain detectable for decades, sometimes centuries. Researchers have located camps from early 20th century expeditions using minimal equipment. No comparable evidence of a German base has ever been found. This absence is not mysterious. It is conclusive. Yet myths do not die from evidence alone. They die when they lose cultural relevance. The Antarctic Nazi myth persisted because it served multiple functions. It extended the drama of World War II beyond its historical endpoint. It allowed the Third Reich to appear almost supernatural in its reach. It transformed defeat into disappearance, which feels more unsettling than failure. It also intersected neatly with emerging fascination around UFOs, secret weapons, and underground civilizations. Antarctica became a blank screen onto which anxieties about modernity, technology, and hidden power could be projected. Historians approach this phenomenon with caution, not contempt. Myths often reveal genuine truths, but not about the events they describe. Instead, they expose the fears and desires of the societies that create them. In this case, the myth reveals discomfort with the idea that such immense evil could simply collapse without cosmic consequence. Antarctica offered a place to hide unfinished narratives. In reality, the end was banal. The Antarctic project ended the same way most Nazi megaprojects ended, not with completion, but with overreach. Resources were diverted, priorities shifted, ideological fantasy collided with physical reality. When the Antarctic Treaty was signed in 1959, the continent's fate was sealed in a way the Third Reich could never have imagined. Antarctica was removed from military competition entirely. No nation would own it. No army would occupy it. It would exist outside the logic of conquest. In that sense, Antarctica became the ultimate rebuke to Nazi ideology. The Third Reich believed the world was finite and divisible, that every territory could be claimed, named, and controlled. Antarctica proved that some spaces resist domination, not through force, but through indifference. Ice does not negotiate. Today, the legacy of Hitler's Antarctic ambition exists only in archives, maps, and imagination. The Neuschwaben land expedition remains a legitimate historical event, studied for its scientific contributions and geopolitical symbolism. The rest belongs to myth. Understanding this distinction matters. When history is replaced by fantasy, we lose the ability to learn from real failure. The true lesson of the Antarctic project is not that secrets were hidden too well, but that ideology cannot overcome environment, logistics, and time. The Third Reich imagined itself eternal. Antarctica reminded it of limits. There was no hidden refuge, no final redoubt, no city beneath the ice. There was only distance, cold, and the quiet end of a delusion. And that is where the story truly ends.